Okay, so it's 5 p.m. in Bremen. Welcome everyone to the Innovative University's global webinar. And I'm very happy to announce that today we will be exploring Olin College. So our today's webinar has a slightly different format than it usually follows. First, we will have a brief introduction from me, then a brief introduction yet from Isak, and then we'll launch directly into the discussion because, as we hope, you have watched the video we have shared with you on our social nets about Olin. As always, you can post your questions in the Q&A part of the Zoom. We will be sure to ask them, trying to build them into the flow of the discussion. And the recordings, again, as usual, will be available on YouTube, and we hope that you will share your thoughts on social nets. Can I have the next slide? Okay, so before I go into the institutional history of Olin, I want to share a bit of my personal history with Olin. I was in Massachusetts in 2018, and I wrote a cold email to the Olin general address, and I asked for a tour, stating that I was quite interested in innovative universities in general and in Olin in particular. I got a very quick response along the lines of ask and it will be given to you. And then I was met by two students, two first years. And I was so impressed by what I saw there, what I experienced when I was walking around the corridors, and also by the gusto and just the general energy that the students were exhibiting while talking about the institution, that I think that was the starting point of my long-term fascination with special and groundbreaking institutions such as Olin. So I'll walk you through the facts very briefly, just in case you haven't had the time to watch the video, or maybe you watched it a while ago and you already forgotten, so just to refresh. Olin was chartered in 1997. It was one of the three new colleges opened in Massachusetts after 1980s. The state has 114 higher education institutions. So founding a college 20 minutes away from MIT was already a radical innovation for the state, which has more colleges than, as it seems, Starbucks is actually. Then you see Olin partner year in 2001. This is the name, and Richard will correct me if I get something wrong. This is the name of the year when students, I think 30 of them, joined the faculty of the non-existent college at the moment and actually co-designed the curriculum with the faculty. And then 2002 was the year when the first courses were taught. Can I get the next slide? Okay, so I'll go really quickly through this. Another innovation, Olin is 50% female. As you probably are acutely aware of, women normally don't apply to STEM schools and STEM, and they don't choose STEM majors as much as men do historically. And Olin was trying to break this tradition by stating from the very beginning that the student population will be divided in half between men and women. Candidates Weekend is the second phase of the selection process for Olin College, because the college is small and quite unique in the way it treats students and in what it expects from students. The faculty want to, and the admissions team actually want to see how students interact with each other. So they selected 200 or 250 students come for a weekend, and then they are evaluated on the basis of live interview and group work to see whether they can handle what the challenges that Olin is going to give them, and that they can contribute from what Olin can provide them with. Entrepreneurship is one of three main points at Olin. So the first one would be real-life engineering, which is design and build projects that you see in the previous bullet point. And the third one, liberal arts, for which Olin students can go to Wellesley College too, or also benefit from courses that were developed specifically at the intersection of liberal arts and engineering. Then we've got senior capstone program in engineering, which is a unique industry university collaboration. And teams are given quite a lot of funds, as you see, to develop projects that contribute to different companies' development in reality. So they are not training projects, they are real projects. And then I guess I'll stop only on two more points, not to take too much time. Passionate pursuits are students' projects that can be artistic, philanthropic, or technical, and they're basically advanced hobbies that students are encouraged to pursue at Olin, because the more opportunities you get to engineer something in your life according to Olin, the better engineer you become, which is proven by the outcomes students have later in their professional paths. And then design thinking and intrinsic motivation. So in preparation for today's webinar, I stumbled upon a paper which I hadn't seen before. And it's titled, "Is Design Thinking the New Liberal Arts of Education?" It was co-authored by Richard Miller himself. It's a quite an interesting paper. I encourage our listeners from liberal arts colleges and university colleges to have a look at it. And the idea is that design thinking, when you apply it to authentic programs in the learning process, actually launches intrinsic motivation, because you have to solve real problem right in front of you. It makes students reflect. It encourages critical thinking, which is very close to what liberal arts have historically attempted to offer students. And now I actually want to pass the mic to Isak so he can introduce Richard Miller, who we are honored to have today, and we can get to the discussion.
Thank you, Dara. Richard, welcome. Good morning in Boston. I don't want to steal even more time from our discussion. Even today we have a larger part for the questions and answers. I just want our audience to think about their luck. So Richard, to make it very simple, I really envy you, because I know that you can come to your college, and I'm interested what feelings you have when you come to your college and you see Richard Miller Academic Center, the biggest building in the campus. It's a rare honor, and it shows how grateful Olin community is to its founding president and first employee. Richard is engineer, and maybe we'll deal with that later. I'm curious how engineers see education institutions, what maybe something specific. Or maybe something specific about aerospace engineering, because Richard has master's degree from MIT and PhD from Caltech, so he really knows what aerospace engineering do. And it's, again, Richard, maybe you will tell us a few words later on how successful and dean of College of Engineering of one of the good universities at University of Iowa, decided to enter this adventure. And I would finish with just two personal things. First, I had a pleasure to be with Richard in different countries where we worked together on innovative higher education projects. And it's very interesting that Richard never gave, never told, just replicate my model. That was not the case. Because, and maybe we'll talk also about this today, models could be different. They should fit the context. And finally, indeed, and maybe next time we'll talk with Richard about his new adventure, because he and his colleagues launched a coalition for transformational education. They published very interesting digital magazine, Learning Well. So even after leaving his position as the president of Olin College in 2020, Professor Miller continues his journey, his professional journey to transform education. So we are looking for a great webinar, great conversation today. And Dara, you're leading moderator today, so go ahead.
Okay, so I'll ask you the question that I warned you about. When you first proposed to found a new engineering college, you were responding to the problems engineering education had at the time. You read the air, you thought about the solution, you shared your ideas, and you got to create a new institution. After that, a lot of other universities in many countries have attempted to copy Olin in their universities, institution-wide, or at least in some elements of their study programs. My question is, how can a national space or a future university founder create something that innovative now, given that you didn't copy? You based your ideas on something that did not exist. You responded to a void. So how does one do that? How can one build something that looks into the future, that creates that path going into the future?
Well, first of all, it's a privilege to be with you today. I am humbled by this very generous introduction and by my opportunity to talk again with my good friend Isak Fruman, whom we've known for a long time. I think your interests and your questions are really inspiring. We have had tremendous interest in the school since it launched. I think you alluded to that in your comments, having in the last 10 years before stepping down, I think hosted visits from about 800 universities in 65 countries. Almost so much that for a small institution, it was annoying to the faculty who thought I was crazy for not saying no to all these people. But I mentioned that the mission of the school, actually the mission which drew me there from a very comfortable position as Dean of Engineering at the University of Iowa, the mission was to become an important and constant contributor to the advancement of engineering education in America and throughout the world. That's not a job, that's a calling. And I had been worried about this for a long time. The question you asked about how do you inspire and support leaders in other countries and in other educational systems to think about bold innovation in higher education for the future is the right question. And I think it begins with an assessment of what the future will hold and a clear-eyed, rational judgment about the dangers that we have in the next century if we don't innovate at a bold level. So I guess to make this easily digested, I would say what I've told many academic leaders. If you have number one, you can't make change without the faculty. Faculty can only teach what they know, so you have to work with the faculty. So you should begin a conversation with them this way. I think if you had 100 words to spend in talking with them, I would use 80 of those words talking about the urgency of the problems that we see on the horizon in the future. Things like global climate change, things like pandemics and global health issues, things like global security issues and AI. And not everything is defensive. There are also opportunities to enhance the well-being of people in the future, making life better. This is happening in a context where the population on the planet has essentially doubled in the last 100 years. There are lots of global issues about demographics and so forth to worry about. The idea that our educational model, which was invented about 1,000 years ago around a set of specialist disciplines that are kind of miniature PhDs in the discipline of history, economics, philosophy, mathematics, and so on, that would be the relevant way to think about knowledge as it emerges in the 21st century is hard to believe, number one. So start with the questions. What are the big issues that we're worried about today? Number two, I would spend maybe 15 words of the remaining 20 talking about what the evidence shows for what kinds of changes might help. What do we know about things that work? I would, and have done this before, well, I'll finish this and then go back and apply it to the situation at Olin when I got there. So 15 words about what does evidence show as hopeful directions we should try. I would only spend 5 words telling the faculty what they should do. I've discovered that, number one, faculty are very smart people, and unless they're intrinsically motivated to do things on their own, they won't really own it or believe it or inspire others to do it. They'll just regurgitate the material that someone else gave them, and that's part of the problem that we face today. So 100 words, 80 words about the problem, 15 words about evidence-based ideas, and 5 words about what to do, and then invite them to help invent it. This is what we did at Olin. I had, and I think Isak alluded to this in his comments, in order to have the conversation with the Olin Foundation Board, which I did in 1998, now, long ago. And at the time, I'll just share with you, I was not 100% excited about this. It seemed kind of crazy to start a new institution from a blank sheet of paper and to do this only 15 miles from MIT. I mean, what could go wrong with that? But I was nominated by someone I deeply respected, who at the time was the president of Harvey Mudd College. And I didn't want him to not nominate me for anything else. So I decided, well, maybe I should call these people and I'll have a conversation. And then I can explain to John that, you know, it's an interesting thing, but it's not a good fit. So, but keep me in mind for next time. And of course, that didn't work out that way. I wound up going there and talking with them and understanding how serious they are with this. They were willing to spend nearly $500 million to start a new institution from a blank sheet of paper. And they were concerned that the country's, the US's national defense and its national economic well-being depended on changes to engineering education. So this is part of the problem, right? So what happens in the US, if you look at this, the US's gross domestic product is dominated by technology and technology entrepreneurship. Maybe you've heard of things like Tesla or Meta or Facebook or Google, or, you know, lots of others, including Boeing and so on. These are companies that make things using advanced technology. None of them would exist without engineering. So engineering is kind of the foundation upon which these fields rest. But on the other hand, if you look at the production rate, very few American students study engineering. In fact, only about 5%, 1 in 20, of the undergraduate students in America choose to study any kind of engineering at any university in the country. And that compares with about 12% in Europe, more than double, and over 30% in Asia. So how do you do this? Nobody is studying the field, and it's the foundation on which the country depends. What happened, of course, is that we've been fortunate that students who graduated in other parts of the world chose to move here and to make their life in America. And it's that foreign talent which has been really useful. So the country viewed that as a strategic risk. We need to do something to improve the enrollment of students. And then the other thing was, if you talk to industry, they told us that the graduates that most engineering schools produce are good at solving equations, but they're not good at working with people. And they've never been thoughtful about creating new things or imagining how to build a prototype or working with a client to meet expectations on time and on budget and bring them back for another product. That, in other words, engineering. So they were good applied scientists, but they really weren't engineers, and the companies had to start over when they got there. So those are part of the problems. So what can you do? We got to a point where I would explain it this way. We did a deep analysis of what the country needs in terms of changes in engineering education, and we found 3 problems, okay? Pretty simple. Number 1, we're educating the wrong people. Number 2, we're teaching them the wrong stuff. And number 3, we're using teaching methods which are known to be largely obsolete and ineffective. Otherwise, though, it's going fine, okay? So in other words, you have to start over to do this. So I wrote a letter to the Olin Foundation on the airplane on the way back from my discussion with them. And I said, if you're really going to spend $500 million to do this right, here's some things you should think about. And we called that the white paper. Okay, so now this is the next president's ideas about what needs to change. The Olin Foundation thought this was really great. And they asked everyone else that they were considering to also send them a paper like this. And I eventually got chosen for the job. And then so on day 1, what do you do? Okay.
Just a second, Richard, may I interrupt you? How long
Sure.
was the paper?
I'm sorry, how long
How
was it?
long was the white paper?
Oh, I think less than 10 pages.
I see. That's
it
a
was-
secret. That's one first secret.
Yes. Pretty much everything I could think of in 1998 about needs for changing in education in ways that engage students. And, you know, there's long stories about lessons learned in Iowa, but the paper was about 10 pages. And I sent it off to them and I said, whatever you do, I hope you think about these things, not really thinking I was going to go there. And when I actually went there, on day 1, you have so many things to do. You have to recruit a leadership team, you know, a provost, a vice president for innovation and research, a vice president for finance and administration, and, you know, build buildings and to start recruiting students. What are you going to do with this paper? So what I wound up doing was deciding that no one person has infinite wisdom about what all students need to learn. We need help. So I did 2 things. I put the paper in a drawer and I didn't show it to anyone else, okay? And I asked for help in building a better paper. Help in 2 ways. I asked the faculty after explaining the challenges and the problems ahead, what would they do to improve engineering education? I want to talk about that for a year, okay? Number 2, I assembled a group of advisors, which we called the President's Council. These were the smartest people I could find, much smarter than me. And I asked them a simple question. If you could change 1 or 2 things about engineering education today, what would they be? You know, I never found anyone who didn't have a long answer to that. Everybody I talked to was frustrated about something. And I mean, I talked to really good people. I talked to the president of the National Academy of Engineering in Washington, D.C. I talked to the president of MIT. I talked to the provost at Caltech, to the dean of engineering at Stanford. I talked to the chief engineer at Raytheon, the chief engineer at Boeing. All of these people, and actually the former president of the University of Michigan, they all had strong ideas. And I said, fine, I need your help. I want you to come twice a year and spend only 24 hours with me. That's all. Come for an evening dinner and we'll give you an update. And I'll write a paper, short paper, a week ahead, framing strategic questions that we're facing. And the next morning, I want you to stand in the auditorium and tell us what you think. And they did. And we did that for 20 years, okay? And I have a long series of white papers now about the strategic questions that we developed. So we got advice. So the number one thing is enough humility to realize that no one has all the answers and you need to do an experiment to find it out. The Olin Partner Year, which you showed on the timeline in the slide a few minutes ago about the development of the college, where we had 15 boys and 15 girls living in construction trailers in the parking lot, is my number one advice to people who are trying to start a new institution. Don't come to Olin and try to purchase the curriculum. I'll give it to you, okay? That doesn't matter. You don't have our students, you don't have our resources. It wouldn't work there. So what you should do instead is to experiment with your own student population. You would put students in a group and ask them to design and build something that matters to them and to do it on time and on budget. And you will say, oh, they couldn't possibly do that because they didn't have a B in physics yet, or they haven't had the right math class. Forget that. Ask them to work as a team and stand back and watch. We did that for at least the first year, and we were shocked at what students are capable of doing on their own. I think this is probably true everywhere. We underestimate what students are capable of learning on their own. And therefore, we discourage them from trying it. And yet it's exactly that adventurous learning on your own, which we need in the 21st century to address these big problems. So I could talk longer about this, but I think it'd be better if I stopped and I invited you to ask more questions so that we don't dwell on one thing too long.
So when I visited Olin in 2018, it was in its pre-teen stage, so to say. It is still very flexible, very playful, very childlike in the best sense of the word, but already normalizing in some aspects. Protocols were being created. Some changes were made to make Olin a bit more like other institutions, because there is only so far you can go in being different. I reckon that over the last couple of years, it has moved to the teen stage. So my question is, how do you go about the institution changing, going through different stages, sometimes fossilizing, sometimes transforming and renewing itself again? What is the best way to approach this dynamic? Should you be pushing it? Should you just go along with it? Should you actually try to slow it for the institution to remain as flexible as possible if you're an innovative university?
Really good question. So it depends a bit on the mission of the institution and on the founding principles and philosophy that you develop. So Olin was designed to become an important and constant contributor to the advancement of engineering education in America and throughout the world. That means it's actually not a college. It's designed to be an education laboratory. And it's supposed to be the test tube in which new ideas are germinated, not the factory that produces them at scale and large institutions. So in order to constantly be involved in experimentation, you need a mission and a mindset and a set of principles that supports that idea. So at Olin, in exploring this at the beginning, in 1999, I went to visit a friend, Joe Platt, who was the founder of Harvey Mudd College in California. Harvey Mudd College is a stunningly successful science and engineering undergraduate institution. It's one of the most successful sources of PhD students in science and engineering in the country. And Joe was the founding president. He was quite elderly at the time, but he spent some time with me. And he told me a couple of things about starting a new institution that have proven extremely valuable. Number one, he said it this way: there's no powerful force for conservatism than having something to conserve. And he says here at the beginning, you don't have anything to conserve. So everybody is willing to be creative and they're willing to try new things. But he says, mark my words, the time will come, maybe in 10 years, maybe in 20 years, when everybody believes that the secret sauce that you have developed is the answer to the universe, and now no one will consider changing it. You can't pry their white knuckles off of those ideas. And that will be a roadblock to creative innovation. So, because he'd seen this at Harvey Mudd. So when we came home from that, we decided to develop some principles. One of them is everything at Olin has an expiration date, just like the food in your refrigerator, okay? Including the curriculum. So in the beginning, it was quite explicit. We basically said the curriculum takes a sabbatical every 7 years, and we reinvent it. We even considered repeating the Olin partner year every 7 years, where we completely rethink everything from the ground up. That turned out the faculty were not fond of that because of the amount of extra work it took. But we embedded that principle, and I believe even today, the percentage of course offerings on a semester-by-semester basis at Olin that are first-time ever courses is higher than it is almost anywhere I know. So they're constantly trying new things. So that principle that innovation and change requires being willing to experiment and willing to let go of some things to make room for new things is fundamental. There are some factors on the other end of that yardstick which need to be considered too. It's possible, in fact, not uncommon in America, for schools to push so hard on being creative and independent that they take the opposite approach. Rather than being the experimental laboratory for everybody to learn from, they become a secret laboratory they don't want anybody to learn from. So if you want to have this special education, you only can come to this school to get it, because that's our secret sauce. That would prevent Olin from achieving its mission. We need to be a partner with lots of other schools so that what we learn is spread to everyone else and it affects all students. So one simple example of this is accreditation. So as you may know, engineering is different among undergraduate majors because it's not only is it an undergraduate degree, but it also is a beginning of a profession, like medicine, law, business, and so forth. Engineering is a profession. And you want this to be not just a course that you studied. Every time you buckle up in an airplane, you want to know that the students who solve the stress equations have the right answer before they put you in the airplane. That's a professional consideration. So to make sure that happens, engineering has an independent accrediting board. It's called ABET. Used to stand for Accreditation Board for Engineering and Technology. And every engineering program in the US that has accreditation is listed on a special web page. The state legislatures pay attention to know whether your school is accredited or not. They're reluctant to send money to a program that's not accredited. So what Olin does in creating innovative things, if it's going to have an impact, had better be something that could be accredited. So that if it's not, other large schools will not be able to follow it. So while it's important to be creative and inventive, it's also important to do that in a way that can impact other institutions. So those two principles, having an expiration date for everything and making sure the experiments are things that could be accredited, are the guiding posts for a school like Olin.
Thank you. I also really like the part about conservatism arriving when you get something to conserve. Isak, I think is ahead.
Yeah, I also I have a question, but I also want to encourage our guests to use button Q&A and ask questions. I have two simple questions, Richard. First, still, yeah, that's, by the way, I also do remember this principle. Everything has its expiration date. And it's, in fact, this is really engineering approach that you have to, after 100,000 kilometers or miles, you have to check the engine and to think. And maybe you have to change the car. Yeah. Unfortunately, our university are waiting all very often for the very last moment when the car is not moving at all. Yeah, but still, when you started the model, you had this experience and from very good engineering school. Could you say in bullets, 3 or 4 biggest difference between engineering training at Olin and traditional engineering training?
Yeah, there's the simplest way of explaining it is we train people to be engineers rather than training them about engineering. Okay, you can't be an engineer without conceiving, designing, building something which achieves a goal for someone else. So, and you almost always do that in a community, in a team, in a group, and there's a negotiation about the principles and about the values along the way. That's actually what design thinking does. That's the sort of foundation of it. So if you look at Olin's curriculum, you'll find that the average kid who walks across the stage on commencement day has completed 25 to 35 design build projects and worked on this in a team, not alone. When I, by the way, was an undergraduate student, this is not what we did. I studied at good schools. I mean, you mentioned some of these. And I did one project as an undergraduate in 4 years. This was at the University of California, which was I'm enormously grateful to, because I would not have had an education without their help. But I did one project in the senior year. It never worked. Okay, we never could figure out what happened to it. It didn't matter. I seemed to graduate at the top of my class, and MIT gave me a scholarship, so it didn't matter to them either. Okay, so projects was not what we did at the undergraduate level. Instead, what we did was problem sets, that answering questions at the back of the book with a bunch of very physics and mathematics oriented textbooks. So I was trained to be an applied scientist. That's what happened in my education. And none of my faculty members were engineers either. I don't think they had ever earned a paycheck because they engineered something. They were supposed to be researchers where they wrote papers. So the biggest change is the focus on projects. The second biggest change is the kind of projects, which I would call human-centered engineering. And this is really important because the student body today that you'll find is struggling with societal changes that we didn't face when we were kids. For example, I know of an institution in the Boston area that had, in 6-month periods, 7 suicides on their campus. The CDC has identified the #2 cause of death in America for kids between 15 and 29 years of age is suicide. This is new. You can use the same lecture notes that you had 20 years ago to teach calculus. You won't get the same results, not because the mathematics has changed, but because the students have changed. So you need to deal with this. Human-centered engineering is about dealing with the human condition in the things that you invent. And on the video, I went through in some detail an illustration of this with a project which we called designing for the elderly in a nursing home. And the idea was we took a small group of students, and we asked them first. It's intrinsic motivation is key. The first day of this class in an engineering course begins by putting students in small groups of about 5 and asking them to talk with each other and identify a group of people whose lives you want to change. Not someday, but in 4 months. And once we've identified a group, in this case, this is a sort of example that I gave, this is a group of the elderly, people who are in their 80s and they're living in assisted living. Some of them have Alzheimer's. We went to visit them. So you bring the students, get this in your head, these are like 19-year-old kids, went to visit 10 elderly people in different nursing homes around Boston, and they spent 2 hours in each of those facilities talking to them about their life. What does it mean to be elderly in America today? Number one, that doesn't happen very often, okay? If you talk to the people in the nursing home, they were shocked. Wow, people under 60 are coming in to look at me. I mean, this like doesn't happen. And then they're asking me about my life. They actually care about me. It turns out you can't spend 2 hours interviewing somebody in their 80s about their life experiences and their problems and what it is that worries them the most without it affecting your sense of empathy and your sense of identity and your sense of belonging as a person. You relate to your grandparents that way. This is about family. Then they go home and they list all the things they heard and they come up with ideas that could change their lives. And they don't know that they can build these, by the way. We don't have a course in how to make an X or a Y that works in a nursing home, but they become motivated, intrinsically motivated to learn about this topic now, specifically because they have a picture in their mind of these people in the nursing home whose lives they want to change. So that's intrinsically motivated, human-centric engineering. And then they become on fire. They experiment with stuff. I want to go have lunch with somebody who knows about fluid mechanics. I want to go lunch with somebody who knows about, RFID data transmission to an iPhone. They don't have a class. I don't have time to take a class. I need to know this now. And at the end of the term, they built something and they go back to the nursing home and they show the prototype to the same people, and the tears in the eyes of the people in the nursing home. Could you actually build this? Because this would change my life. And now the students, although they're 19, have this sense of identity and belonging. They have a sense of agency because they didn't have to have a course that took them by the hand with answers in the back of the book. They invented it on their own. And finally, it ends with delivering something that would change someone else's life that gives you a sense of purpose and meaning. That's identity, agency, and purpose, which is a human-centered design. And now my challenge to you is now try and stop them from learning that way for the rest of their life, okay? They're on fire now.
Look, I would be provocative because when you go to engineering university, the dean or president will show you a motivated group of students that did something very useful for the community. So they now all engineering schools understand that that's what they want to show. But somehow you managed that every student. So I usually ask, by the way, when they show me something like that, I ask, okay, what percentage of your students have this experience? And the honest answer is something between 5 and 10. But in your case, it's 100%. How did you organize this? Because you need professors to supervise, or students do it completely on their own. So how you made this be an engineer instead of listening about engineering, 100% available and implemented on the campus?
Yeah, this is a really critical question, Isaac, and I'm going to answer it in 2 ways. One of them is, how did Olin do it? Starting from a blank sheet with $500 million and being able to pick our own faculty, and how could an other long existing large state-supported institution, how could they make changes like this too? Because those are 2 different questions. In Olin's case, number one, we were fortunate. It's never underestimate the value of being lucky at what you do. We were in the right place at the right time. We attracted the right people at the beginning. So the founding faculty had a great deal to do with this because they invented the curriculum. This is not that white paper that I had in my drawer, okay? It's much better than that white paper because of the year of experience and experimentation. So as a process, and this is what I normally say to visitors to Olin, don't copy our curriculum, copy our process. So go home, take an extra year, because everybody thinks they're a hero if they can say, we're going to open on September 1st and everybody's going to do X. It never works, okay? Take an extra year, because it'll take longer than you think. Whatever you think it will cost, double it, because it always costs more to do something new than it does something that's off the shelf. And you still won't be right, but you'll be closer. Okay, so you have to have the humility to say, I'm going to learn things here. This is not just implement stuff that I found somewhere else. So that's number one. Number two, do it as an experiment. Don't announce that you're going to end everybody else's faculty career and they're going to now have to do something different on September 1st. Tell them it's insignificant. Don't worry about this. We're just trying something to learn things, and let the students and the faculty who are experimenting with it do the heavy lifting of persuading everyone else that this is better, because you saw this, their enthusiasm, their commitment to this. You can't stop them from learning now because they are on fire. They will change the way the faculty and the students in the institution believe, because they are challenged by this. How did this happen? It's so much better. So that's the best shot at it. If you're at another large institution, I guess the best example I can give, and this, although, I mean, I would even recommend maybe should be on your interview list for your, innovative institutions, is Jim Plummer. Jim Plummer is the now retired Dean of Engineering at Stanford. Stanford is the school that created design thinking, okay? It's part of what's called the D School at Stanford, or design school. And David Kelly, who was the founder of the D School, would be an absolutely inspirational person to meet. He's written a book called Creative Confidence, which I'd highly recommend, about how everyone has the capacity to be creative and to design things that change the world for a better place. But the trick is, Stanford is not a startup. Stanford has a lot of success and a lot of confidence. How in the world would you get Stanford to change the way they do things? It's much more difficult to do that than it is to start with a blank sheet at Olin. And the way Jim Plummer went about it was not what you would think. He basically said, don't pay attention to that little shop in the back that keeps designing products that David Kelly is working in. It's not going to affect you, don't worry about it. And David Kelly's course became so impactful, students from all over the university were enrolling in it because of what they could learn. And the students went back to their departments and said, you've got to find a way for me to take more of this, because this is really important. He did the same thing with what's now called the Stanford Technology Ventures Program, which is one of the most successful entrepreneurial learning programs in the country. This is how Silicon Valley started. The person who engineered that, who, if that's possible at a place like Stanford, is Jim Plummer. I can tell you lots of stories of our interactions with other schools. And I probably shouldn't name names, but a number of Big Ten institutions we worked with. One of them was very excited about what Olin did, and they said, I'm going to create an Olin College on my campus. And this was a dean of engineering, and he decided he would create a new department, okay? If I couldn't make the people stop doing what they were already doing, which was good anyway, so just leave them alone, and I'll create a new department. And this one we'll come up with a creative name, and it's where all of this innovative stuff will happen. But the other faculty members discovered that he had resources to create a new department, and they said, oh, that's a bad idea. You should just give it to us. And the new department never happened. We had another Big Ten institution who did really well, and this one is the University of Illinois, and they created something called the iFoundry, which was an experiment which is cross-disciplinary boundaries. And if you are a faculty member with an idea about new experiments you'd like to run, you raise your hand and you apply to the provost. If you're named a fellow in the iFoundry, you're given, I'm going to make this up now because it's approximately true, some resources like a reduction in teaching load and a couple of graduate students to work with and an experimental course number. And you can try an experiment that you hope other departments will find useful. They did that really successfully. The guy who we followed with that group is named David Goldberg. He and Mark Somerville from Olin wrote a book about this. It's called A Whole New Engineer. And it gives you a blueprint for how you can take the ideas generated in a small test tube like Olin and spread them to a large Big Ten university in the center of the country and do that successfully. David Goldberg has also gone on to create he became so excited about this that he quit. He resigned from Illinois and he started his own sort of nonprofit. It's called 3Joy. consulting, and he's been around the world preaching the same kind of transformational change about design thinking and intrinsic motivation to universities in other countries. So he also might be an interesting person for you to interview along the way. So those are things that work. There are lots of examples I can give you that didn't work, but I don't want to go into too much detail about that because there might be some bad feelings about it.
Yeah, and we have only 10 minutes, so I know that Dara has a couple of important questions also based on your video. Dara, please.
So I have a couple of questions from the audience sent to me via personal messages. But before we get to that, I wanted
We have only 9 minutes, just remember. Yeah.
Okay, well, I've been holding my question for quite a while. So in the light of European universities initiative still unfolding and the question of collaboration being extremely important for all our European listeners, I've always been fascinated by how BOW works, Babson, Olin, Wellesley collaboration. I feel it's one of the prime examples at the global level of truly complementary relationship between institutions. But I'm sure that beyond what I see on the website and what I've heard, having visited all of the three institutions, there have been some issues. There must have been some issues. So the question is, how do you build a successful collaboration, and what are some of the undercurrents that people are usually not aware of, but should be?
Really important. So it's a very pragmatic thing for Olin. It's not an accident that it happened. The Olin Foundation chose to place Olin College where it is, specifically to enable this collaboration with neighboring institutions. Most institutions don't have the opportunity to relocate themselves so they can be next to another school. But when you're starting from a blank sheet, you have that chance. How it happened, we concluded that from a resource point of view, we didn't have enough money to build Stanford University. This is going to be a small institution and it needs to be focused on engineering. But you need more than engineering courses to educate an engineer. But if we could find a way for the engineering students at Olin to cross-enroll at Wellesley College and take language courses and take courses in pre-medicine and so forth, that would be a tremendous benefit to us. And maybe the price we pay is that we extend an invitation to Wellesley to cross-enroll some of their students to take courses in engineering, so they don't have to own the engineering faculty to do that. And of course, we have a third member of this partnership, which is Babson College, which we're even closer to. We can walk there from our campus. And that's a business school, so students can learn about business and entrepreneurship. So those are the three players. And to get this started, I mean, I found out that there is no such thing as a partnership if there's a dependence that's involved. You have to have something to offer a partner which is of value to them. You can't just go to them and say, I want your help. Why do they need to solve your problem? They have their own problems to solve. So if you can offer something that's of value to them that in exchange is worthy, this can happen. It also depends on trust. So the way this started, I had the obligation at Olin to expose engineering students to the principles of professional ethics. This is an accreditation requirement. Engineers have to understand something about ethics. I'm not an ethicist, okay? And I can't become an ethicist. None of the faculty wanted to do this, so I took it on. But what I did was I called the presidents of Babson and I called the president of Wellesley, and I asked them if they would be willing to join me in team teaching a course, a seminar course, which we called Issues in Leadership and Ethics. And it would be open to students on all three campuses. Now, none of us is an ethicist, so we're not going to be lecturing in this class, but we could, the three of us, invite guest speakers. And one of the things that happens, if you get an invitation to go somewhere and give a talk, it's a much stronger invitation if it has the signature of 3 college presidents on the letter than it does if it has 1. So we would be more successful at getting these visitors to come by working together. And we did that for 10 years. And it gave us time for the presidents to have dinner together, to talk about the collaboration on the campus. One of the things that I discovered is that the other campuses had limitations too. one of the things that we found, it's true at Olin, when we're competing for admission for incoming students, we almost never lose a student to another undergraduate school. We always lose them to a large, like an Ivy League university or to Stanford. And the reason is those schools have more options available on the menu. You don't have to decide when you're 18, I want to be an engineer. If you go to Stanford, you might say, I might want to be an engineer, but I might want to be a neuroscientist or something else too. And I can't tell yet, but if I go to Stanford, I can try that out. But if you go to Olin, you have to make that choice immediately. Well, it turns out if you go to Babson, you have to decide you're going to be a business graduate. If you go to Wellesley, you have a bigger academic menu, but it's a women's only school. You don't have an opportunity to explore what it means to be a student in a classroom that has men and women at the same time. So rather than trying to constantly explain this to students, what if we work together and imagine a catalog that you could send to prospective students that had all three catalogs combined together and say anything in this larger space is available to you. So the opportunity cost that you have to coming to this small institution is much lower than it would be if you went to any other undergraduate institution, because we're like a miniature university, okay? And that took off and I think became quite useful. I've seen a version of this. There are, Harvey Mudd College is in a group like this in Southern California. It's called the Claremont Schools. There's a group like this in Western Massachusetts as well, 5 institutions that share cross enrollment. There's other institutions with a little bit less success that have to do with a large state institution being in the same town with a small selective liberal arts college, and there's cross enrollment there for reasons that help. What are the barriers? One of the barriers is the what I call the balance of payments. So, if one school sends a whole lot more students to the other one than they take in, then there is somebody, an accountant in the office will say, well, wait, we're spending too much money on this. So you have to deal with the available space in the issue. As we only have so many openings for this cross enrollment to work. Not everybody can get in, but it's I think the spirit of collaboration is one that begins with humility, that we could learn from each other, that your students and our students could both be better if they learn to team. And that's probably the most important part about the collaboration.
Well, humility is actually a good beginning point for many, many things in higher education and beyond. So normally we end the webinar by asking for advice for other university founders or for people who are still considering that. But because we started with this today, I'll ask a different question. So engineering education has had many changes and shifts over the last 100 years. So first theory was introduced, then people woke up to projects, real life projects, then you got soft skills. After that arrived authentic experience combined with engineering thinking, not just engineering practice, as applied to real life problems in different areas. So in one word, what is the next big frontier for engineering education?
Well, if I could have 4 words, I think I could get there.
Okay, you can have 4.
I think the future for education, and this is actually not just engineering, I think it's for lots of them, are to work on problems that matter. If you have to go to an encyclopedia to figure out what the discipline is that's on your course description, this is not going to motivate students. I think you should start with problems that the students are motivated about, and you should only study them in context, which means that it's probably not in a department. There should be a panel of faculty members to define the problem. Problems like, for example, social justice, poverty, global stability, how invention and entrepreneurship works, this sort of thing. Problems that matter, problems in context, which means that you have to study this as a team. Only do problems that involve teamwork. I think we overemphasize the sit by yourself, don't talk to your neighbor, get the right answer on the multiple choice test, and then you're educated. It doesn't work, we know that, but we do this because it's easy to assess. Do things as a team. And finally, here's the goal that I think every education should push. The purpose of what we're doing is to prepare people to envision what has never been and do whatever it takes to make a better world. It starts not with the mathematics, it starts with vision. Kids love that, okay? It's a chance to be creative. It's a human experience to improvise, to make a better world. We don't have room for that in the way we structure education today, and I think there's a huge amount of benefit everyone could gain if we just embrace that idea.
Thank you.
Very much.
Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, so this is the moment when we have to end the webinar to my disdain, and yet we can announce the next one. So the fun does not end here. In 2 weeks, we will be talking with Paul Sterzel of University College Freiburg. University College Freiburg is a successful story of a liberal arts institution or department, depending on how you want to look at it, within Freiburg University. And we hope that we will get to discuss how it was founded, how it broke through typical bureaucracy of a German higher education institution, how it's faring now, and its future. So see you then, and we, as usual, hope that you will leave your impressions about this webinar using our hashtag Innovative Universities on LinkedIn or in any other place. Richard, thank you again. It's been truly a pleasure.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. Good to see you both.
Good. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you.